There are secrets that hide behind the smiles of every family. Quiet, buried, waiting for the day they explode. He always believed his family was built on love, until one final whisper shattered everything he thought he knew. Your father isn't who you think he is. What happens when the truth finally surfaces? When loyalty, betrayal, and power collide? Today you'll witness a story where silence was the only protection, and breaking it comes at a terrifying price. Enjoy the story. I arrived at the hospital just past midnight, when the world outside had fallen into a quiet, heavy darkness. The long corridors felt endless, filled with the soft hum of fluorescent lights and the faint scent of sterilization. Each step I took echoed off the walls, but inside me, everything was silent, except for my heartbeat, which thumped with growing panic. My grandfather had been the anchor of my life, a towering figure of wisdom, kindness, and unwavering strength. The man who stepped in when my father didn't. The man who never let me feel the absence that quietly haunted every family gathering. But tonight, the strongest man I knew was slipping away, and I was terrified that I wouldn't make it in time to say goodbye. As I entered the room, the dim glow of machines illuminated his face. He looked smaller, almost fragile beneath the layers of blankets. His chest rose and fell in shallow, uneven breaths, the rhythm of life growing weaker. But when he opened his eyes and saw me, there was still a glimmer of recognition, like a spark buried beneath ashes. I approached his bedside, my throat tightening. "Grandpa, I'm here." His hand trembled as he reached for mine, gripping it with surprising strength for a man so close to the end. And then, without warning, his voice broke through the silence, barely a whisper, but sharp enough to slice through the air like a blade. "There's something you need to know. Something I've carried for too long." The room seemed to grow colder. My entire body tensed. I leaned in closer, my heart pounding against my ribcage. "What is it?" His eyes filled with moisture, and for a moment, I saw a flash of fear behind them. "Your father, the man you call your father, he's not who you think he is." The words hung in the air like toxic smoke. My stomach churned. "What do you mean, Grandpa? What are you saying?" I barely recognized my own voice. It was shaking so violently. He closed his eyes briefly, as if trying to summon courage from somewhere deep inside him. And then, in a voice so faint I could hardly hear it, he continued, "I promised your mother I would never tell you. But I can't leave this world carrying this weight. You deserve to know who you really are." I felt dizzy. My mind raced through memories, family vacations, birthdays, holidays, searching for cracks in the image I had always believed was my reality. My father, was he not my father? The thought was impossible, insane. And yet here was my grandfather, the man I trusted more than anyone, revealing a secret so dark it threatened to tear everything apart. My voice cracked as I whispered, "Please, Grandpa, tell me everything." For a moment, he simply stared at me, his frail fingers still wrapped around my hand. The silence stretched out like a heavy fog between us. Then, with a fragile breath, he began to speak, his voice a trembling thread. "When your mother was young, she was different. She had this wild spirit inside her, always searching for something more. She fell in love with someone she shouldn't have." His eyes shifted, as if he was looking through the walls of the hospital into the past. He was dangerous, not in the way you might think, not violent, not cruel, but reckless. Reckless with emotions. Reckless with promises. I could feel my chest tightening, my breath growing shallow. Who was he, Grandpa? Who was this man? He closed his eyes, his thin lips trembling. "He was a man your grandmother and I tried to keep her away from. But love doesn't listen to reason. And when she got pregnant with you, he disappeared. Just vanished. Left her alone. Left you alone before you even took your first breath." His voice cracked under the weight of guilt that had been bottled up for decades. "Your mother was devastated, shattered. She didn't want you to carry that shame. She didn't want..." You to grow up feeling abandoned. So, when your mother met your father, the man who raised you, he made her a promise. He agreed to raise you as his own. He gave you his name, his home, his protection. The room felt like it was spinning. The foundation of my identity was being dismantled piece by piece. The man I had admired, called Dad, loved, even resented at times for his emotional distance, was not my blood. My entire life had been built on a silent pact made long before I was old enough to understand it. My voice was barely audible, shaking as I asked, "Did he ever love me? Was it all a lie?" My grandfather's eyes filled with tears that finally spilled onto his cheeks. He loved you in his own way, but he could never fully let go of the fact that you weren't his by blood. That's why he was distant. That's why I tried to step in, to fill that void he left. The weight of his words pressed against my chest like a boulder. My mind flashed back to moments that never quite made sense. The awkward silences, the unspoken tension at family gatherings, the moments when my father seemed like he was forcing himself to connect with me. I had always blamed myself, thinking I wasn't good enough. Now the truth hit me with brutal clarity. I had been carrying a burden I never even knew existed. "But who is my real father?" I asked, barely able to contain the tremor in my voice. My grandfather's expression shifted: fear, regret, and something else, hesitation, as if this was the part he feared most. He turned his head slightly, as if checking to make sure no one else could hear. "That's the part I never wanted you to know." His breathing grew heavier, as if the very act of speaking these words was draining what little life he had left. I could see the internal battle raging inside him, the weight of decades spent protecting a secret, now colliding with his final need for honesty. "The man who fathered you." He paused, eyes trembling. "He wasn't some lost boy. He wasn't some poor kid who ran away from responsibility." His voice lowered, almost to a whisper, forcing me to lean in closer. "He was a powerful man. A man with influence, with money, with connections that extended into places we were too afraid to even mention in this family." My blood ran cold. My thoughts scattered like broken glass. "What do you mean, powerful?" I asked, my voice hoarse. He closed his eyes, his lips quivering as if afraid the walls might have ears. "He wasn't just anyone. He came from a family that, let's just say, plays by their own rules. When your mother got pregnant, we thought they would force her to get rid of you. We were terrified. But instead, they made an offer." His hand tightened around mine again. "They paid your mother. They paid her to walk away, to never contact him, to never reveal your existence. And to protect you, we all agreed to bury this secret. Forever." The air grew heavier, the fluorescent lights above buzzing like angry insects. My mind screamed with confusion. Paid? Bought off? My very existence reduced to a transaction? And my mother? She agreed to this? I asked, unable to mask the betrayal flooding my voice. Tears filled his eyes again. "She didn't want to, but she was scared, son. We all were. They threatened us. Subtly, of course, but the message was clear. Walk away, or suffer consequences." He shook his head. Weakly, I tried to fight. I wanted to expose him. "But your mother, she begged me not to. She thought hiding the truth was the only way to protect you." My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. "And my father? The man who raised me? He knew this? He agreed?" My grandfather's eyes broke into fresh tears. "Yes, but it ate at him, every day. That's why he kept his distance. He raised you, but every time he looked at you, he saw a child who wasn't his." A reminder of her past. The pain in my chest was unbearable now. I wanted to scream, to cry, to punch something, but all I could do was sit there, frozen. The man I thought I knew, the family I thought was mine, the love I believed I had, all of it was entangled in decades of fear, betrayal, and secrets. And yet, I knew this wasn't the end. There was something more my grandfather was still holding back. I could see it in his eyes, that haunted, terrified look that only someone with knowledge far darker than what had already been revealed could wear. He took another struggling breath. But there's something else. Something I never told anyone, not even your mother. The air in the room thickened as if the walls themselves were closing in on us. My grandfather's eyes locked onto mine with a desperate intensity. "What I'm about to tell you," he whispered. "I never wanted you to carry this. But I can't leave it with me." His hand trembled in mine, his skin cold, the weight of his words pressing against both of us like an invisible force. My mouth was dry, my throat tight. "Please, Grandpa, tell me everything." His lips parted, but the words seemed stuck for a moment, as if his soul was resisting their release. And then, like a dam breaking under unbearable pressure, he finally spoke. "The man who fathered you wasn't just powerful. He was married." The words struck me like a blade to the stomach. My head spun. "Married?" I gasped. "Yes," he continued, his voice cracking. "To a woman from another family, just as powerful. Their marriage wasn't about love. It was about business, an alliance between two dynasties. But when your mother came into the picture, everything changed." His chest rose and fell with labored breaths as he tried to push forward. "She was never supposed to happen. You were never supposed to happen. If the truth had come out back, then it would have caused a scandal that could have destroyed everything they built." I could barely process what I was hearing. My very existence wasn't just a family secret. I was a threat to a legacy, an inconvenient truth buried beneath decades of lies and manipulation. "They feared you," my grandfather said, his voice turning brittle. "They feared what you represented. An illegitimate child could destroy their carefully constructed empire." My hands trembled. My stomach twisted. But why didn't they just... I couldn't even bring myself to finish the thought. My grandfather knew exactly what I meant. His eyes darkened. "There were talks, quiet ones, options discussed behind closed doors. But your mother refused. She disappeared for a while during her pregnancy, remember?" I nodded slowly, my mind replaying old stories my mother used to tell about her time away. Vacations, trips. I never questioned them. Now I saw them for what they really were. Hiding. Running. She went into hiding until you were born. Your grandmother and I helped her disappear. We moved mountains to keep you safe. She risked everything to protect you." His voice grew, weak, barely audible now. "But even after you were born, they kept watching. They knew. They always knew. And we lived every day under their silent threat." My skin crawled. The shadows of my life now made horrifying sense. The unexplained fear my mother sometimes showed, the sudden relocations, the carefully avoided conversations. "Who are they, Grandpa? Who are these people?" I demanded, my voice filled with urgency. He turned his head slightly, glancing toward the door as if someone might be listening. His voice dropped even further, almost imperceptible. "The Whitmore family." The name hit me like a thunderclap. A name I knew from the whispers of wealth, politics, and old money that controlled so much of our city's hidden power structures. My heart sank. "You mean that Whitmore family?" He nodded slowly, his eyes filled with pain. "Yes, and they never forgot about you." For years, the Whitmore name had hovered like a distant storm cloud over our city. Old money, generational, power. The kind of family whose influence wasn't displayed through flashy headlines but through quiet control. Judges appointed, businesses acquired, politicians indebted. They weren't just wealthy, they were untouchable. And now my grandfather was telling me that I was directly tied to them. "Grandpa, they knew about me all this time?" My voice was barely a whisper, as if saying it too loudly might summon them. His eyes closed briefly, his face contorted in regret. "They knew. But as long as we stayed silent, as long as your mother obeyed their conditions, they let you live your life." My head was spinning. A silent war had been waged around me my entire life, and I had been completely unaware of it. Every choice my mother made suddenly took on new meaning. The jobs she turned down, the people she avoided, the guarded way she navigated social events. She wasn't paranoid. She was protecting me from something far more dangerous than I ever imagined. Did they ever contact you, threaten you directly? I asked, barely breathing. His lips tightened into a bitter line. Once, he said, his voice nearly cracking, when you were about 6 years old, a man came to our house, well-dressed, polite, but every word he spoke was a veiled threat. It's in everyone's best interest that the boy grows up quietly, that he doesn't ask questions. His eyes glazed over as he relived the moment. I told him if he ever came near you again, I'd bury him myself. I shuddered. My grandfather, the man I had always admired for his strength, had been carrying this burden alone for decades, standing like a lone soldier between me and an invisible enemy, and I never knew. But why didn't they just take me? Why let me grow up at all? The question haunted me, and I needed to understand their game. My grandfather's voice turned dark, because for them, it was always about appearances. Scandal would cost them more than silence. As long as you stayed out of their world, you were a ghost, a stain they could pretend didn't exist. But if you ever tried to claim your blood, to claim your name, his eyes met mine, filled with a haunting seriousness. They would erase you. The enormity of his words settled like a heavy stone in my chest. My entire existence balanced on an unspoken agreement I had never even consented to. I wasn't just an outsider to them. I was a threat, a living secret that, if exposed, could bring down the very structure of their empire. My voice trembled as I whispered, "And now? Why tell me now?" His hand gripped mine tighter, as if pouring every last ounce of strength into his answer. "Because I'm dying. And once I'm gone, I can't protect you anymore. If something happens, you need to know who you are. You need to know what you're walking into." A strange cold spread through my body as his words sank in. For a moment, I couldn't speak. My entire life had existed inside a carefully crafted illusion, and now, standing at the edge of that illusion, I felt exposed, like a pawn suddenly made aware of the board he'd been living on. "What happens if they find out you told me?" I finally asked, my voice raw. My grandfather exhaled slowly, eyes sinking deeper into the pillows. "I don't think they care anymore. I'm no longer a threat to them. And you, well, as long as you stay quiet, you'll remain a shadow to them. But if you ever seek them out..." He stopped, his eyes narrowing. "You must understand, son, these people don't forgive disobedience. They protect their dynasty at any cost." A heavy silence settled between us as the machines in the room hummed their lifeless song. I couldn't even begin to process what my next steps should be. Do I confront my mother? Do I bury this secret forever? Do I walk away from the truth of my bloodline? My grandfather saw the confusion swirling behind my eyes, and for the first time that night, his expression softened with a touch of sadness. "You remind me so much of her," he whispered. "The fire in your eyes, the stubbornness, the need to know." His voice grew fragile again. "That's why I had to tell you. You would have found out one way or another." I sat back, my head pounding under the weight of everything. And yet, beneath all that heaviness, something else began to stir. Anger. Not just at the Whitmore family, but at my own parents. My mother, for shielding me so completely that I had grown up blind. My father, or rather, the man I thought was my father, for building a relationship with me on a lie. Every birthday gift, every forced hug, every distant word now carried a different color. They had all known. My entire life, everyone had known, except for me. Was I ever going to be told? I asked, my voice rising involuntarily. Were you planning to take this to your grave? My grandfather's face twisted in pain. Yes, he whispered with shame. Because I thought I was protecting you. His honesty burned like acid. But you weren't protecting me, I choked. You were protecting them. You were protecting their secret while I lived my life in the dark. His lip quivered as fresh tears slid down his cheeks. I know, and I'll regret that until my last breath. His voice broke. We were scared. We thought silence was the only way to keep you safe. I see now. We were wrong. The anguish in his face was undeniable, but it did little to quiet the storm raging inside me. My world had collapsed in the space of a single night, but I could feel something else too now, something darker rising beneath my grief. A burning curiosity, a dangerous hunger. Who exactly is my real father, Grandpa? His name. I want his name. For a moment, my grandfather's eyes filled with a terror I hadn't seen before. Son, you don't understand what you're asking. His breathing grew labored, his hand trembling violently as it gripped mine. If I give you his name, you step into a world you're not prepared for. A world that doesn't play by rules, you know. But I didn't care anymore. I had lived my entire life as someone's well-protected secret. I deserved to know everything. My voice was steady now, cold. Tell me. His chest rose and fell in uneven waves, the effort of speaking clearly costing him more than he could spare. But he saw the determination in my eyes, the fire, the need. And at that point, he knew he couldn't deny me the truth any longer. His name, he whispered, barely audible, is Harrison Whitmore. The name landed like a thunderstrike inside my skull. I had heard that name my entire life. Harrison Whitmore, the patriarch of the Whitmore dynasty. A man whose photo adorned glossy business magazines, whose handshake could change political landscapes, whose smile concealed deals that shaped industries. My real father was one of the most powerful men in the country. I leaned back in my chair, my mind spiraling out of control. This wasn't just scandalous. This wasn't just a family secret. This was dangerous. I was the illegitimate son of a man who built empires on his image of integrity, legacy, and wealth. And now I carried a truth that could destroy all of it. Did he ever acknowledge me? I asked, my voice hollow. My grandfather's face twisted into a bitter smile. Never openly. To his world, you don't exist. That's how they survive. They rewrite reality. He paused, coughing weakly before continuing. But I know he kept tabs on you. Quietly, indirectly. He made sure you stayed out of his path, because if the media ever found out, if his shareholders ever smelled blood, his empire would tremble. The room seemed smaller now, the walls tighter, the air thinner. I could barely process. The storm of emotions, betrayal, fear, rage, all colliding inside me like an uncontrollable firestorm. And my mother? She never tried to confront him? My grandfather shook his head weakly. She was offered enough money to buy her silence. And after you were born, they made it crystal clear that if she ever came forward, they'd ruin not only her, but you. Every door would close, every opportunity crushed. Your life would have been a living nightmare. The more I heard, the sicker I felt. My mother had made a deal with the devil, and I had been its currency. I sat in silence for a moment, staring at my grandfather's pale face, trying to ground myself. And yet one more terrifying thought wormed its way into my mind, spreading like poison. Does Harrison know you're telling me this now? My grandfather's eyes widened with a flash of dread. No, he whispered. No one knows I'm breaking the pact, not even your mother. I had to do it alone, before it's too late. The urgency in his voice made my skin crawl. For the first time, I realized that what he was doing wasn't just an emotional confession. It was an act of rebellion. A betrayal of a powerful family's long-standing agreement. And suddenly, the room no longer felt safe. I could feel the invisible pressure growing thicker around us, like unseen eyes were closing in. My mind raced with thoughts I couldn't quiet. If Harrison Whitmore ever discovered this conversation had taken place, what would he do? What would they do? My grandfather's voice interrupted my thoughts. weaker now, almost drifting. "You have to be careful from this point forward," he whispered. "This isn't just a family matter. It's politics, business, power. The Whitmores built an empire by keeping their hands clean while others did the dirty work. They don't forgive loose ends." His eyes darted to the window, as if expecting someone to be listening from the shadows. I swallowed hard, my hands cold and clammy. My entire body felt tense, like I was sitting on the edge of a blade. "What am I supposed to do, Grandpa?" I whispered, my voice raw. "Just pretend I never heard any of this?" He closed his eyes for a long moment, breathing shallowly, before answering. "For now, yes." His voice trembled. "I didn't tell you this to push you into a war you can't win. I told you so you wouldn't be blindsided if one day they decide you're no longer safe." The weight of his words pressed harder against my chest. "They've allowed you to exist in the shadows because you were quiet. But now, that may change." A chilling realization struck me. By simply knowing the truth, I had become dangerous. Even if I did nothing, the mere possibility of exposure could be seen as a threat to the Whitmores. The rules of my life had shifted overnight. My existence wasn't simply inconvenient. It was a liability, and liabilities are eliminated. My breathing quickened as I tried to steady my nerves. "Grandpa, has anyone ever tried to hurt us before? Has anyone ever tried to silence you?" He hesitated for a moment too long. His silence answered the question before his voice did. "There were warnings, phone calls, letters. They never needed to be direct, just enough to remind us who held the power." My stomach twisted. The world I thought I knew felt distant now, like it belonged to someone else. Everything, my childhood, my parents, my own sense of identity, had been orchestrated by fear. And worst of all, I didn't even know how far their reach extended. "Is anyone watching me now?" I asked quietly, my voice barely audible, as if my question alone might trigger some hidden surveillance. My grandfather's eyes locked onto mine, haunted. "I can't say for certain, but it's safer to assume, yes." He paused, his lips quivering. "You were invisible because you didn't know, but now you do, and they'll sense that shift." The room felt colder. A creeping dread slithered up my spine. My innocence had been ripped away in one night. And now I was left staring into a world of hidden rooms and dangerous men who didn't tolerate risks. My grandfather coughed violently, his body convulsing with the effort. I reached for him, but he grabbed my wrist firmly, pulling me close. "Listen to me," he whispered, his voice raspy and desperate. "There's something else, a contingency, a safety net your mother and I created in case this day ever came. But you need to know exactly where it is, because one day, you might need it to survive." His breathing was shallow, but his grip on my wrist was stronger than I expected for a man on the edge of death. His eyes burned with urgency. "In my study," he rasped, "behind the old grandfather clock, there's a false panel." His voice broke, forcing him to pause as his body struggled for air. I leaned closer, heart pounding. "Inside that panel, you'll find a safe. The combination is your mother's birthday. Everything you need is in there. Documents, letters, photographs, proof." His eyes welled up again, but this time it wasn't guilt, it was fear. "If anything ever happens to you, or to your mother, those files are your leverage." I felt my skin crawl. Proof, concrete proof. The kind of evidence that could burn down an empire if it ever saw the light of day. "Why didn't you destroy it?" I asked, my voice trembling. His face twisted into a painful smile. "Because people like the Whitmores don't fear threats. They fear exposure. As long as that evidence exists, they have a reason to leave. You alone. It's the only protection you've ever had, even if you never knew it." The reality of my entire life grew clearer with every word. My safety had been bought not with loyalty or forgiveness, but with a silent hostage exchange of information. For years, that safe had been quietly pulsing like a bomb beneath my feet, and I had been too blind to know it even existed. "What's inside?" I whispered. My grandfather's face darkened. the lines around his eyes tightening. Birth records, private correspondence between Harrison and your mother, even a copy of the financial settlement they paid to make you disappear. Enough to destroy him, publicly, to fracture their pristine legacy. But also enough to make you a target if it ever fell into the wrong hands. His voice lowered, almost to nothing. The Whitmores don't just bury threats. They erase them, completely. The gravity of what he was revealing left me paralyzed. Every moment of my life had been carefully choreographed under an invisible contract. I had grown up thinking I was safe, loved, protected. But in truth, I had been a hostage. My silence, my ignorance, was the price of survival. My hands began to tremble, the room spinning slightly as nausea swelled in my gut. "Why me?" I whispered. "Why tell me all of this now? You could have just let me stay ignorant." His grip loosened slightly as his strength finally began to fail him. "Because ignorance won't protect you forever. You're not a child anymore. If they ever sense weakness, they'll move. And when that time comes, you'll need to be ready." I stared into his eyes, seeing both the unbearable guilt of a man who had lived with this secret for decades, and the desperate love of someone who wanted to give me one final chance to survive. The machines next to him beeped in a slower, more erratic rhythm now. His time was nearly up. "You have to promise me something," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Promise me you won't go looking for them. Not yet." My throat tightened as tears welled up in my eyes. "I promise," I said softly. But deep inside me, even as I spoke those words, a new voice had already begun to rise. Louder, sharper, angrier, whispering, "You deserve to know who you really are." The monitors beside his bed emitted slow, erratic beeps now, each one punctuating, the air like a ticking clock nearing its end. His breathing grew shallower, his eyelids heavier. But even as life slipped from his body, his grip on my hand remained, as if he refused to let go until he had poured every remaining drop of truth into me. "I should have told you sooner," he whispered, his voice barely audible now, words trembling on fragile breaths. "But I was selfish. I thought, if you didn't know, maybe you could live a normal life." He coughed, a deep rattling sound that shook his chest violently. "But I see now that ignorance isn't peace. It's a different kind of prison." The words struck me deep. My entire life had been lived in that prison, a carefully constructed illusion where the walls weren't built of bars but of lies and silence. "I understand now, Grandpa," I whispered back, my throat tightening, tears stinging my eyes. "And I don't blame you, not anymore." But even as I said it, a bitter knot of anger still twisted inside me. Anger at the Whitmores, at my parents, at this entire legacy of deceit that had shaped my existence without my consent. My grandfather's lips curled into a faint smile. "You're stronger than I was. That's why you need to be careful. They'll underestimate you at first, but the moment they sense you know the truth, they'll close ranks." The monitors chimed again, slower. His grip weakened. His skin grew colder. The end was approaching, and I could feel it pressing against the edges of the room like an invisible fog. I leaned closer, my forehead almost touching his. "Is there anyone I can trust?" I asked, my voice shaking. His eyes flickered open one last time, struggling to stay connected to me. "There's one man, an old friend of mine. He's retired now, lives quietly off the grid, named Samuel Drake." He coughed again, his whole body shuddering. "He helped me protect your mother. If things ever get dangerous, he'll know what to do." I committed the name to memory. Instantly, Samuel Drake, the last potential thread of safety in a web of powerful enemies. My grandfather's eyes glazed for a moment, his breathing becoming shallower still. The beeping of the machines turned irregular, the tempo broken. I felt his grip slip, his strength finally surrendering to the inevitable. "Promise me," he gasped. "You won't act until you're ready." A single tear rolled down my cheek as I whispered, "I promise." His eyes gently closed. A soft breath escaped his lips. And then, silence. The machines screamed into the room with their sharp, continuous tone. I stayed frozen, clutching his now lifeless hand as nurses rushed in, but their voices faded into white noise. In that moment, all I could hear was the echo of his final words. Words that had forever altered the very foundation of my life. My grandfather was gone, but the storm he unleashed had just begun. The funeral was quiet, private, just family, a few close friends, and the obligatory whispers of neighbors offering hollow condolences. But even as I stood by my grandfather's grave, staring at the freshly turned earth, I couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were watching me from somewhere beyond the tree line. My mother stood beside me, her face a cold mask of composure, but her trembling hands betrayed her. We hadn't spoken about what my grandfather had revealed. Not yet. I didn't know if she even suspected what he had told me in his final hours. Part of me resented her silence. The other part knew she was just as much a prisoner of the Whitmores as I had been. As the priest's words faded into the wind, I noticed something strange. A black sedan parked just beyond the cemetery gates. Tinted windows, engine running. It wasn't anyone from the family. And yet, it remained there, motionless, like a silent observer. My stomach twisted. Could it be coincidence? Or was this my first taste of the invisible hand my grandfather had warned me about? My mind screamed for answers, but my body stayed frozen, unwilling to draw attention to my growing suspicion. Later that evening, back at my grandfather's house, the air felt heavy with absence. Every room carried his ghost, his books, his photographs, his old clock ticking rhythmically in the hallway. I couldn't avoid it any longer. I stood before the grandfather clock, my pulse racing. I reached behind the heavy wooden frame, feeling for the false panel he had described. My fingers found the latch easily. It clicked open with a soft pop. And there, nestled behind the ancient gears, was a steel safe embedded directly into the wall. I stared at it for a long moment, my breath shallow. This was the vault of truth. The weight of decades compressed into a single locked box. My hands trembled as I entered my mother's birthday into the keypad. With a soft mechanical click, the door unlatched, revealing a thick stack of folders, sealed envelopes, and a small velvet pouch resting on top. The documents were meticulously organized: financial records, handwritten letters, legal agreements. But at the center of the pile was a manila envelope with one simple word written on it: insurance. I pulled it free, my hands shaking. Inside were photographs, grainy, clandestine images clearly taken without consent. Harrison Whitmore and my mother, together, intimate. Evidence that went far beyond whispers and family rumors. There were also recordings, transcripts of conversations I could barely believe existed. And worst of all, at the bottom of the envelope was a notarized contract, the financial settlement that had purchased my silence before I was even born. Signed, sealed, stamped. The magnitude of what I held in my hands was overwhelming. This wasn't just family drama. This was leverage, power, a sword hanging over one of the most powerful families in the country. And now, that sword was in my possession. But with it came the chilling realization: possession made me dangerous. And in the world of the Whitmores, dangerous things don't live long. The following morning, I woke to an unfamiliar sound, one that didn't belong in the stillness of my grandfather's old house. It was subtle, almost innocent. The click of the mailbox lid dropping shut. But the timing was off. No mail carrier came this early. My pulse quickened. Moving cautiously, I stepped toward the front door, every muscle tense. Peering through the window, I saw a plain envelope resting alone inside the mailbox. No return address, no markings, just my name, handwritten in neat, controlled script. With trembling fingers, I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of thick white paper. One sentence, centered perfectly in the middle. "Some things are better left buried. There was no signature, no threats, just the chilling simplicity of the message itself. My breath caught in my throat. This was no coincidence, no prank. Someone knew. My promise to my grandfather had barely lasted 24 hours, and already invisible eyes were reminding me that my ignorance had been my only shield. And now, that shield was gone. The house suddenly felt unsafe, wide open and vulnerable. Every window felt like a pair of watching eyes. Every creak in the wooden floorboard sent shivers up my spine. I tried to steady my nerves, reminding myself of my grandfather's instructions. Samuel Drake. I needed help. I couldn't navigate this alone. I returned to the study, pulling out the smaller folders from the safe, desperately searching for any information on this man. Near the bottom, I found an old address book, the pages yellowed and worn. There he was, Drake Samuel, 147. Pine Hollow, Rard. I recognized the area, a remote property far outside the city, tucked deep into the woods, secluded, off the grid. Exactly the kind of place my grandfather would have chosen for someone capable of disappearing. I wasted no time. Grabbing the files, I packed a small bag and left the house, constantly checking my rearview mirror as I drove. The black sedan was gone from the cemetery, but I couldn't shake the feeling that other eyes had simply replaced it. The longer I drove, the more isolated the landscape became, winding country roads swallowed by dense forests. After nearly 2 hours, I finally reached the property. A modest cabin surrounded by towering pines, with no other structures in sight. As I stepped out of the car, I half expected silence. But instead, a voice called out firmly from the porch, "You must be his grandson." My heart jumped. A tall man stood there, older but solid, his eyes sharp and alert. He held no weapon, but his posture made it clear he was prepared for anything. "I'm Samuel Drake," he said, his voice low but calm. "Your grandfather told me one day you might come, which means the storm has finally started." Samuel Drake studied me with eyes that had clearly seen too much. Calculating, controlled. There was no urgency in his movements, only caution, as though every moment was weighed before being spent. He didn't invite me in immediately. He simply stood there, silently measuring me, as if trying to see beneath my skin, into my very intent. "It started sooner than I expected," he finally said, his voice carrying a heavy gravity. "Your grandfather hoped we had more time. He always believed the silence would hold, but the game has shifted." I tried to steady my trembling hands, forcing my voice to stay calm. "They already know," I confessed. "I got a message this morning." Samuel nodded slightly, unsurprised. "Of course they do. The moment you opened that safe, the moment you crossed from ignorance to knowledge, they were watching." He turned and slowly opened the cabin door, signaling for me to follow. Inside, the place was Spartan but prepared. Maps pinned to the walls, old newspaper clippings, faded photographs, and thick, organized files. It was clear Samuel hadn't just been waiting. He'd been preparing for years. "Your grandfather hired me decades ago," Samuel began as we moved through the small office. "I was a private investigator back then, specialized in disappearances. He brought me in when your mother discovered she was pregnant." I sat heavily on an old wooden chair, my mind absorbing his words like a man drowning in bitter truth. "But why would you take the job?" I asked, my voice quieter. "You knew who you were dealing with." Samuel's eyes locked onto mine, sharp, cold, unwavering. "Because I'd seen what the Whitmores do to people who get in their way. Your grandfather didn't buy my loyalty. He offered me something they never could. Truth." He paused, his gaze darkening. "And maybe a chance to finally fix something I couldn't stop years ago." He reached for a thick file labeled Whitmore Family Operations. My stomach twisted as he flipped it open. "You don't understand the depth of what you've stepped into," he continued. "Harrison isn't just a CEO. He's the center of a structure, a network that stretches into the judiciary, the media, the banks, the government. They aren't a family. They're an institution. A cold sweat gathered at my temples. So, I'm not just an accident, I'm a threat to the institution. Samuel nodded slowly. Exactly. Not because you exist, but because now, you know. His words echoed like hammers in my head. For years, I'd been nothing but a ghost in their story, harmless as long as I remained blind. But now, I had become an active threat, even if I hadn't moved yet. You need to be smart now, he warned. They'll watch your next steps, carefully. First, there will be polite reminders, then financial pressure. And if that doesn't work, silence. Permanent silence. Your best advantage right now is that they don't know what you intend to do with what you have. I closed my eyes for a moment, feeling the crushing weight of the decision ahead. What was I supposed to do with this truth? Burn down their empire and ignite a war? Or keep living in the shadow of a name that was never truly mine? And then Samuel said something that burned itself into my mind. The most dangerous thing isn't the secret you're holding. It's what they believe you might reveal. The following days felt like living inside a silent war zone. Nothing moved on the surface. No threats, no confrontations. Yet I could feel the pressure tightening around me with every breath. Samuel kept me at the cabin, insisting we lay low while he assessed the field. The first mistake they expect you to make, he explained, is to act impulsively. Panic gives them permission to move. But inside me, the battle was growing louder. I couldn't sit still. The truth burned inside my chest like a fuse slowly approaching a stick of dynamite. We spent hours reviewing the files from the safe. Samuel's eyes darted across each document with surgical precision. Names, accounts, transactions, old correspondence. Your grandfather collected more than I thought, Samuel muttered. This isn't just scandalous. This is leverage. This is destruction. He paused, setting one particular document aside. This changes everything. I leaned. RD. It was a confidential memorandum between Harrison Whitmore and a federal judge, discussing quiet interventions on multiple investigations that could have crippled Whitmore's holdings. Proof of corruption. Proof that crossed into criminal territory. If this ever leaks, Samuel said flatly, it won't just ruin him. It could collapse multiple institutions tied to him. Banks, courts, politicians. He looked up at me, his voice turning colder. Which means they will stop at nothing to prevent it from ever seeing daylight. You aren't holding a family secret anymore. You're holding a bomb. The weight of that statement pressed against my lungs, stealing my breath. For years I had been oblivious to the depth of this machinery. I was never just some bastard child. I was a thread that could unravel an entire power structure. That night, as I lay in the guest room of Samuel's cabin, my mind refused to shut off. Every sound outside felt amplified. The wind against the trees, the distant rustle of branches, and then a light, faint, small, out there in the woods, moving. My pulse spiked. I sat up slowly, staring through the sliver of the window. Another light appeared, closer this time. Headlamps. Not one, but two vehicles. They stopped just beyond the tree line, engines idling quietly. I moved fast, slipping into the hall and knocking on Samuel's door. He was already awake, fully dressed, gun in hand. His face was calm but alert. "They're here," I whispered. He nodded once, speaking in a low, controlled voice. "Stay away from the windows. They're not here to talk." My throat tightened. "Are they going to try something tonight?" Samuel's eyes narrowed. "No, not yet. This is their message. We see you. They're reminding you that you're never out of reach." We sat there in the dark, listening as the engines eventually turned off. The silence that followed was more terrifying than noise. Minutes passed like hours. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the vehicles turned back on and slowly disappeared into the night. But the message had been delivered. There would be no safety now, only strategy, only survival. The following morning brought no sense of relief. The sun rose, casting pale light through the trees, but the weight in my chest remained. The image, of those vehicles watching from the woods burned itself into my mind. They hadn't come to attack, not yet, but their message was loud. We are watching, we are patient. Samuel brewed a pot of bitter coffee as we sat across from each other, the silence between us thicker than the forest air. He broke it with a voice low and measured. Now you see their game. They never strike first. They want you to feel hunted. Paranoid. It forces you into mistakes. I nodded slowly, feeling the fatigue pressing behind my eyes. But we can't sit here forever, I said. They'll keep tightening the noose. Samuel's eyes remained fixed on me. Correct. Which means it's time for us to send a message of our own. My heart pounded. What kind of message? He leaned forward. One that makes them pause, not an attack, not a threat, just a signal. Something that reminds them you're not alone, and that if anything happens to you, certain things will get released automatically. He opened a drawer and pulled out a small, secure digital drive, placing it on the table between us. This, he said, is a dead man's switch. I've duplicated the most damaging evidence from your grandfather's safe onto it. We'll place this in multiple undisclosed locations, linked to timed releases if certain triggers are met. I stared at the device, understanding the gravity of what we were setting into motion. This won't stop them, I whispered. Samuel nodded, eyes grim. No, but it changes the cost of action. The higher we raise the price, the longer they hesitate. For the first time since this nightmare had begun, I felt a tiny shift inside me. Not confidence, but clarity. This wasn't about winning. It was about surviving long enough to control the pieces on the board. As we continued working through the files that afternoon, Samuel suddenly paused, pulling one folder aside. This one you haven't seen yet. He slid it across the table. Inside were photographs I had never seen before, recent ones. Surveillance shots of me, of my mother, of my workplace, of my apartment. My stomach dropped. These weren't taken years ago, Samuel said. They're active. This is how closely they've been monitoring you, long before your grandfather's confession. My throat tightened as a sickening thought pierced my chest. My mother, is she safe? Samuel exhaled sharply. For now, yes. But now that, she's become part of your liability. My hands balled into fists. I have to warn her. Samuel nodded. You do. But carefully. If she panics, if she runs, they'll interpret it as movement. And movement invites action. I sank back into the chair, breathing heavily. The invisible world I had stumbled into was far more vast and coordinated than I had ever imagined. My entire life had been monitored like a chess game, every move observed, every connection mapped. And now, I was no longer just a piece on their board. I had become something far more dangerous, an unpredictable variable, and variables terrify. People like the Whitmores. The following evening, the phone rang. It was the old landline in Samuel's cabin, a device I hadn't even noticed before, tucked beneath a shelf of dusty files. Samuel froze. We exchanged a brief glance before he walked over and answered, his voice calm. Drake. There was a pause, and then I saw something shift in his expression. A flicker of recognition, followed by ice-cold focus. He didn't say another word, simply listened. After a moment, he slowly placed the receiver back into its cradle and turned to, Face me, that was them, he said softly. My stomach dropped. What did they say? Samuel exhaled through his nose, eyes narrowing. They know exactly where we are, and they just made their first offer. I stared at him, pulse pounding. An offer? He nodded. They want to negotiate. They're proposing a private meeting, neutral ground, no lawyers, no press, just family. The word felt acidic in my ears. Family, I repeated bitterly. Why now? Samuel folded his arms. Because they've assessed the risk. They see you as unstable, unpredictable. That makes you dangerous. And before they escalate into full containment, they're giving you an opening to either submit quietly or misstep publicly. Either way, they regain control. I paced across the room, my hands shaking. And if I refuse? Samuel didn't hesitate. They'll escalate. Fast. For a long moment, we stood in silence. Every instinct inside me screamed to refuse, to burn the bridge and make them feel fear for once. But another part of me knew what Samuel was warning. Unpredictability cuts both ways. "Do we go?" I finally asked. Samuel's voice was steady. "We go, but on our terms." He pulled out a small, flat device from a drawer, a signal jammer. "We control the environment. We record everything, and we make sure they know we're not walking in blind." The meeting was scheduled for the next evening, in a private dining room at one of the Whitmore-controlled hotels downtown, a place designed for discretion, away from cameras and curious eyes. As we prepared to leave the cabin, Samuel handed me a small transmitter. "Whatever happens in there," he said quietly, "stay calm. They'll probe you. They'll try to bait you into revealing how much you know, how far you're willing to go. But the moment you show your hand too early, you lose your leverage." Driving into the city that night felt like approaching the edge of a cliff in complete darkness. The towering skyline gleamed in the distance, cold and indifferent, as though the very buildings themselves were complicit in protecting their secrets. As we entered the underground parking lot of the hotel, two men in tailored black suits approached our car, silent, expressionless, efficient. "This way, Mr. Whitmore is expecting you." I followed, my heart pounding against my ribs, my mouth dry, my legs heavy with dread. And as the private elevator doors opened on the top floor, I stepped into a world I had never touched before. Polished marble, soft lighting. And standing at the head of a long table was the man himself, Harrison Whitmore, my biological father. The man whose existence had haunted my every breath since that night at the hospital. He turned slowly, smiling with a cool, composed confidence that instantly chilled my blood. "So," he said smoothly, his voice rich and deliberate, "we finally meet." The room was engineered for intimidation. The lighting was soft but calculated, the temperature cool, the silence oppressive. Harrison Whitmore stood there, perfectly composed, his tailored suit immaculate, his hair silvered but strong. There was no hint of surprise in his face, no flicker of discomfort, just that same icy control that had defined his empire for decades. "Sit," he said softly, gesturing toward the chair directly across from him. His voice was smooth, almost soothing, like venom wrapped in silk. I lowered myself into the chair without a word. Samuel stood behind me, watchful, silent, a protective wall of calm. Harrison leaned forward, folding his hands neatly on the table. "I assume your grandfather told you everything?" I said nothing. His lips curved slightly. "Of course he did. That was always his weakness. Sentiment." His gaze sharpened like a scalpel. "And yet, here you are, alive, healthy, well-educated, provided for. Don't you find that curious?" The cold audacity of his words made my skin crawl. "You mean bought?" I finally answered, my voice steady but cold. "You bought my silence before I was old enough to speak." Harrison's eyes twinkled, as though amused. "We protected you. You were given a life free of scandal, free of burdens you were too young to carry. A clean life. Do you have any idea how much trouble you were spared?" The room fell silent again, the weight of unspoken threats hanging heavy in the air. I leaned forward slightly, meeting his gaze directly. "You didn't protect me. You protected yourself." His smile never wavered. "Semantics. Protection is protection." He paused, studying me as if evaluating a new piece on his chessboard. "The question is, what do you want, son?" The word son struck me like a blade, the first time he had ever spoken it aloud. Not with affection, with calculated precision. A tool, a lever, a weapon. I said nothing, forcing him to continue. "I'm prepared to make this go away, permanently. You walk away from this nonsense. You destroy whatever copies you and your friend have made, and in exchange, you'll be taken care of, generously." My jaw clenched. "And if I refuse?" His smile finally faltered for a brief telling moment. "I would advise you not to refuse." His voice lowered, chillingly calm. You've stepped into a world you don't understand. A world that eats men alive, no matter how righteous they believe themselves to be. I stared at him, feeling the heat rise beneath my skin. For years, this man had controlled my life without ever speaking my name. For years, I had existed as an invisible stain he thought could be permanently erased, and now he sat across from me, offering money as if my existence could still be negotiated. "You think this is about money?" I whispered, my voice steady, but ice cold. "You think you can buy me the same way you bought my mother's silence?" Harrison's eyes darkened. The charming smile faded into something colder, harder. "Everything is about money," he said quietly. "Or power. You're here because your grandfather couldn't grasp that simple truth. And now you're standing at a crossroads, one that will define whether you live a long, quiet life or a very short, very tragic one." The threat wasn't theatrical, it wasn't bluster. It was surgical, measured. This is how men like Harrison Whitmore operated. No raised voices, no anger, just consequences spoken softly enough to be terrifying. "I didn't ask for any of this," I replied, my voice shaking now, but refusing to crack. "But I won't let you erase me. Not now, not ever." He tilted his head, studying me like a chess master deciding whether the pawn across from him was worth sacrificing or fearing. "You think this makes you strong?" he asked. "It makes you vulnerable. Because now you carry something far more dangerous than ignorance, importance. And important people attract dangerous attention." Samuel, silent behind me, finally spoke for the first time. His voice cut through the air like a blade. "You've underestimated him, Whitmore. That was your first mistake." Harrison's eyes flicked toward Samuel, measuring him, then back to me. "You've made alliances," he said flatly. "That complicates things, but complications can be corrected." The air in the room grew thicker, every breath heavier. Harrison slowly leaned forward, lowering his voice to a whisper, almost conspiratorial. "You're not my first problem. You won't be my last. But here's the difference between you and the others, my boy. You're still blood. And that gives you exactly one opportunity no one else ever got." He paused, letting the words hang. "Come into the fold, quietly, obediently, and you'll have access to everything. Power, influence, protection. Walk away from this childish rebellion, and I'll open doors you never dreamed of." The room went silent. The offer hung in the air like poison sweetened with honey, and for a split second, I could feel it pulling at some deep, primal place inside me. The fantasy of belonging, of finally being part of the world that had always rejected me. But as quickly as it came, it curdled into something bitter. I leaned in, lowering my own voice to meet his. "I was never your blood. I was your mistake." The words hung in the air between us like a blade suspended by a single fragile thread. For the first time, Harrison's carefully composed mask cracked, just slightly but enough. His jaw tightened. The veins at his temple pulsed. The smile was gone. What remained was the raw, unfiltered truth beneath decades of calculation. He hated that I existed, not because I was weak, but because I was living, breathing proof of his failure, a fracture in his perfect world that could never be repaired. "You have no idea what you're walking into," he whispered, his voice darker now, stripped of pretense. "You think you're playing some righteous game. You're not. You're standing in a fire that will consume you long before it touches me." His voice lowered further, his eyes drilling into mine. "People like you die in accidents, or disappear in ways that leave no stories to tell." For a brief moment, my body wanted to give in to the fear. Every primal instinct screamed at me to run, to fold, to disappear like they wanted. But beneath that fear was something stronger now. Rage. Pure, cold rage that had been simmering ever since my grandfather's dying breath. I refused to be the shadow anymore. I refused to let him dictate the narrative. "I know exactly what I'm walking into," I said softly. "And you're right. You're more powerful than me. You control courts, politicians, media. You've erased people before. But there's one thing you can't erase this time." I reached into my jacket pocket and placed a small encrypted flash drive on the table between us. Harrison's eyes locked onto it like a predator sizing up fresh prey. "This isn't leverage," I continued. "It's insurance. The minute anything happens to me, this goes public, not just through one source, through dozens, multiple countries, distributed networks. My grandfather spent years building it. You taught him to fear you. He taught me to prepare for you." The silence that followed was deafening. Harrison stared at the drive, his breathing slow, measured. But I could see it, deep behind those cold eyes, the calculation shifting. The cost had just changed. I was no longer a silent liability. I was an active threat. And worse, I was one he could no longer easily control. Finally, he sat back in his chair, folding his hands once more, the smile returning. But this time, hollow, brittle. "You're smarter than I gave you credit for," he said softly. "You've bought yourself time." He stood slowly, adjusting his cufflinks with careful precision. "But don't mistake time for safety. Time always runs out." With that, he turned and walked out, leaving me and Samuel alone in the suffocating silence of that luxurious cage. I sat there frozen for several seconds, my heart pounding in my ears. Samuel finally placed a firm hand on my shoulder, steadying me. "You just changed the game," he whispered. "But now you have to survive it." The car ride back from that meeting was silent. The city lights blurred past the windows, but my mind wasn't in the car. It was somewhere deeper, inside that conversation, inside his eyes. I had stared into the face of a man who held the lives of countless people like strings in his hand. And yet, for the first time, he didn't pull mine. Not because he couldn't, but because I had forced him to calculate the price. For men like Harrison Whitmore, cost is the only language they respect. Back at Samuel's cabin, I finally let my body collapse onto the worn couch, my chest rising and falling under the weight of exhaustion I hadn't allowed myself to feel until now. Samuel sat across from me, calm as always. "You held your ground," he said simply. "That's the first rule. Never show them fear." I exhaled slowly, my voice hoarse. "But they're not finished, are they?" Samuel shook his head. "No, you bought space, not peace. They'll wait, watch, probe. If they find weakness, they'll act." A long pause hung between us before I finally spoke again, softer this time. "I never wanted this. I didn't ask for this war." My voice cracked under the weight of truth. "I just wanted to know who I was." Samuel's eyes softened, and for the first time I saw not the tactical man of calculation, but the one who had once sworn loyalty to my grandfather. "That's the cruel irony of truth," he said gently. "Once you taste it, you can't go back. Even when ignorance was safer." I thought of my grandfather then, his frail hand gripping mine, his voice cracking under the weight of guilt and love. He had spent decades protecting me from this moment, carrying a secret that nearly destroyed him. And yet, as much as I mourned his passing, I finally understood why he had waited until his last breath to tell me. He knew there was no way back. The truth wasn't freedom. It was a burden, one I now carried. I stood up, walking slowly to the window, staring out into the dark pines that swallowed the cabin. Somewhere out there, I knew, their eyes were still watching, waiting. "What happens now?" I asked. Samuel rose, his voice steady. "Now you live your life carefully, quietly, but ready. Because the Whitmores never forget, and neither should you." And as I stood there, breathing the cold air, I felt something shift inside me. Not peace, not closure, but resolve. I may have been born into this world by accident, but I would not remain its victim. I would carry the weight of my grandfather's sacrifice. I would honor the price my mother paid, and I would never allow them to erase me again. Some families are built on love. Mine was built on silence, but not anymore.